You have a new idea for an app. It's something your company has never seen before, and it has real potential to transform the way business is done. And that's great. But now what? How do you go from an idea in your head to your users' hands? Well, it depends, like most things in tech. Many companies and leaders like doing things the same old way because they just work. And you can end up feeling somewhat like a mannequin just made to move according to a specific way. And the result is that it can sort of like suck the joy out of your new ideas. It may take longer to execute, and also it stifles the creativity of your team. But what if I told you there was a better way? Kotlin Multiplatform. That's what we're going to talk about today. Now, like most things, it's a process. So I'm going to walk you through a case study of how we implemented KMP into our production apps at Meetup. Along the way, I'm going to share various tips and resources to help you do the same thing at your company. And we'll go all the way from gaining buy-in for using this new technology to exploring it, how you can form your team, actual development, as well as testing what you've built with real users. So let's go. Buy-in. During this phase of the process, you want to prepare the business case and then get buy-in from the higher ups. Now, step one was just a friendly conversation with the CTO. Okay, it was more like this. Having executive sponsorship makes the work of introducing a new technology much easier because once you're able to convince the CTO to give your idea a chance, then you have a really powerful ally in conveying the benefits to the other executives, which can lend support to your initiative. And it's not always an easy sell because likely your CTO has written some HTML and JavaScript before. So you're going to have to compete with their extensive knowledge in this particular area. I joke. I respect CTOs. Okay, so we'll start with helping them to see the cost benefit of introducing such a change. And these are many things that you've heard before when you talk about Kotlin multi-platform. So first, you have this faster time to market. You have a more consistent user experience between your multiple platforms, as well as no new headcount to execute this feature, which was one of the main selling points that we had at my company. And there's more cost benefits that you don't often consider as a developer, and that depends on the state of your company. So let's say your company is working to be acquired or to perhaps get some more investments, and you work for Green Thumb. This is a product that helps you not kill your plants by providing some sort of plant care advice. Now, I'm going to make one small change. What does this mean? AI, right? Now with AI, okay? So maybe I could have gotten like $1 million investment before this one small change, and now I might get like $3, $4, $5 million investment. So this happens when you're using these like cutting edge technologies like KMP, because they look at it and they say, oh, wow, there's so much potential here. What's even better is your CFO can be happy because of something called R&D tax credit. Ooh, maybe you've heard of it. And this is due to the efforts that your team spends working on newer technologies. So it's basically just like a win-win for everyone. And at this point, you've started to reel them in. They can practically smell the money in the air. And they see the potential cost benefits of adopting this new technology. But some of these same things can be achieved using any cross-platform solution. Why KMP? Likely, it's going to involve some table similar to this, where you explain the differences between the popular cross-platform solutions, and then you make KMP seem like the most compelling option. And for the icing on the cake, Share some case studies of what other companies have achieved by using KMP. Maybe they've had increased productivity, better performance, or just their bottom line was better. And so this is, yet again, an additional way to ensure buy-in. Now, during the exploration phase, this is where you want to begin to establish, besides just KMP, what other types of technologies do you plan on using? Maybe create a preliminary architecture for your project. Decide on any sort of integrations that might be needed as well for the MVP of this particular project. So early on, I really wanted to give Kotlin Multiplatform a shot for our new application. Previously, I've developed some apps using Flutter, and the ability to create cross-platform applications is honestly very enticing, especially when you're trying to deliver something quickly like an MVP. But what specifically intrigued me about the KMP approach versus some other cross-platform solution was the following. So first, KMP didn't impose any restrictions on how we developed our apps UI. We wanted to work with the latest declarative frameworks like Swift UI and Jetpack Compose, and KMP didn't stand in the way of allowing us to do that. Also, it doesn't prevent you from working with the platform directly. Whenever there's some tasks that can't be solved using the shared code, then you can use expect actual pattern to just seamlessly write platform-specific code. And finally, just Kotlin. Like, I love Kotlin. We didn't want to introduce a new programming language into our stack. Our Android engineers were very familiar with Kotlin, and we knew that since Kotlin was so close to Swift, that the iOS engineers, they would be okay. Now, at this point, it was super theoretical. We knew about the proposed benefits, but we wanted to prove it to ourselves. To do this, we allocated 2 months just to uncover any potential blockers to our plan. Specifically, we wanted to implement one entire flow in our new application using KMP. What would we gain by implementing an entire flow beginning to end? Well, first, we didn't never use expect actual before, so we would get to know about that pattern. We would be able to properly handle asynchronous shared code, working with Ktor for authenticated requests, integrating with Apollo Kotlin in our shared code, also best practices for handling translations. Our app needed to support 13 different languages, and also using Firebase for some behavioral tracking. Now, initially, we pretty much knew what libraries we wanted to use for like our networking, our tracking, and our persistence. But when it came to some other features like translations, logging, we had so many options to choose from, like picking a cereal in America. It's just really a daunting task. So what do? We took to Twitter and we tried to get some answers. I personally find the community to be a great source of advice on which libraries to use. And if nothing else, just the fact that you know multiple companies are using a particular library means that you'll have more people that you can reach out to in case you get stuck, which happened to us a lot. Now, let me share what we learned during this phase of the process. Okay, that's me without a tan. No, it wasn't as dramatic as this, but we definitely had a very lackluster response to KMP from the iOS engineers. They were concerned about the added complexity of using a cross-platform technology, and many of them just weren't interested in using Kotlin at all. So, WIIFM. What do you think is a safe for work question that this stands for? Oh, someone said it louder. What's in it for me? That's the question. That is the first question that we always think of whenever some type of change is headed our way. What's in it for me? And for the iOS engineers, at first, it didn't seem so great. In fact, a worse developer experience. Yay, I was already fighting Xcode, now I can learn to fight Android Studio. How exciting. Now, oh, Gradle. I never had to use that before. Great, I'm so happy I get to do that now. Also, whoa, Objective-C, I love reading this header file. Almost how you would feel if, as a Kotlin engineer, you were told, no more, just write everything in C. Next, loss of autonomy. If the Android engineers knew Kotlin, and they were going to be the ones focused on the shared code, then I have to wait until I can get my changes done for the Android people? No way. And finally, perhaps a decreased sense of job security. If a whole portion of our application is going to be written by our Android engineers, who are historically cheaper than iOS engineers, does this mean that my job is now more in jeopardy? Jetpack Compose is so similar to Swift UI. Aren't the Android engineers going to be able to quickly learn that technology and begin contributing to the UI portion of the code base? And you know what? Most of this is probably true to some extent. And so their feelings were really valid. And I understood why they were so focused on that question, what's in it for me? So how do we address this? We fired all the iOS engineers. No. We did not do that. We listened to them and we really encouraged them to work together on the different features. They would often pair or mob with the other Android engineers on the shared code. And I told them, look, if you come to a place where you just cannot deliver the product because we're using KMP, call it out immediately and we'll switch. What is the absolute worst case scenario for you? We have to rewrite some Kotlin in Swift for the iOS app. That's it. That's the worst case scenario. And I'm okay with that. And we have executive support. We're okay with that. And what was the end result? All of the iOS engineers ended up being able to contribute to the shared code base. One in particular took a Kotlin programming course and was so excited to use the language more. And whenever we did run into some non-ideal shared code, they were eager to collaborate with each other to come up with a real solution. And the final thing that really stuck to me during this phase of the project is that you need an actual deadline. After all, it's an MVP, right? You don't have to know the answer to every single technical detail in order to move forward. From experience, the team was just so lost in a concurrency and multi-threading solutions with KMP. I think because someone talked about it in a conference talk. And finally, I asked them, look, how often do you expect to deal with this problem? Rarely, maybe never, I don't know. Okay, so then let's move on, all right? So you need to have an agreed upon deadline for explorations so that you don't end up falling into similar trap that we did. All right, speaking of my wonderful team, let's talk about how to form this group of folks. To start out, you're likely going to fall into one of two buckets. Either you already have a team of people who are just eager and ready to work on this project, or you need to hire them. And regardless, here are some things that you want to keep in mind as you're forming your team. So first, you want to think about how exactly you're going to organize everybody, because the team's makeup is going to be critical to the success of your project. For example, we wanted to create a new app. We needed a designer. Initially, we were like, okay, how hard can it be? Let's just have someone working part-time. Big mistake. It became a huge struggle for the team, as initially the iOS engineers were just cranking out screen after screen, and we just needed to get everyone have closer communication. Also, when you're working on an MVP, things are more volatile. Things are changing very often, so you want to have a group of people who are good collaborators and good communicators. And if you're working with a technology like KMP, it is helpful to have strong Kotlin engineers. Everyone didn't have to be an expert, but we had at least 2 very strong Kotlin engineers on our team. And I've personally found that having just one more Kotlin or Android engineer than iOS kind of kept everything flowing really smoothly with the project. Now, most importantly, you need people that are just flexible. They can't be married to every single plan, every feature, every date. It's over, right? Things are changing too often. You need people who are very flexible, can just kind of like roll with the punches, so to speak. And honestly, I can't even count how many times we had to change the scope or adjust the dates of our MVP. Why? Because we're talking to customers, the needs of the business changes, and you just want to have a team that can kind of like adjust with those changes and then keep things moving forward. So, what do we learn here? Bringing together a smart group of people to build something new and innovative is going to have its challenges. Specifically, you may find yourself running into situations where every single person has an opinion and every single opinion is different from the other person's opinions. When should we bring on the first users? How are we supposed to onboard them? I don't know about that particular library. Do we really need to support 13 languages? And then the list goes on and on and on. To prevent the team from losing sight of the big picture, you really want to have someone who's like a key stakeholder who can make the final call. Trust me, establish this person in the beginning before you write one line of code. You won't regret it. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for development. And the big question here is how much code should we share? As a fan of Kotlin and in general a technology nerd, I wanted us to share as much as possible. I really wanted to see how far could the team push it. And remember these conversations? We weren't really at a place emotionally where everyone on the team was as comfortable as sharing as much code as was possible. And my goal was to ensure the success of the project, not to be a trailblazer. And so that's something that you also want to keep in mind, because just because you can do it doesn't mean that you should. Somewhat of a Jurassic Park reference. And what ended up happening? Well, the team settled on sharing business logic and then the common pieces that would power it, like our GraphQL queries and mutations, API requests, domain models, etc. And then for the UI, they had separate kind of stacks using Swift UI and Jetpack Compose. And this worked out really well for us. And it stayed like that for a while. But then something really interesting started to happen. The team came to me and proposed that we combine all of the apps together into one monorepo. They started to see the benefits of using KMP and having shared code. And so this would allow for having even more, let's say, like connection and consistency among all of the apps. So instead of just this one new app using KMP, all of the apps at Meetup were using it. And I was just very excited for them to come to this conclusion on their own. And we definitely saw the benefits of this approach. We were able to launch a new subscription product in record time, and it was on track to make over $1 million in the first year. And keep in mind, this is a group of about 10 engineers. So it's honestly really incredible what we were able to achieve. Now, on to what we learned during this phase. We just changed too many things all at once. This is what we were working with before, and we ended up changing to all of the following. And there were delays on certain features, and it was often not because of the KMP code. It was mostly because of these other technologies. Like everyone was familiar, all of the Android engineers were very familiar with creating code using XML layouts, but only one person was familiar with Compose. So now everyone was trying to get up to speed using it. Also, we were very familiar with using Roam, but now we're using SQLite. Moshi, Kotlin X serialization, retrofit, we've been using for 1,000,000 years, and now we're using Ktor. And then we had very nice nav graph set up, and now we were using Compose navigation. So changing all of this at the same time is honestly my biggest regret here. If I were to do it again, I would have just limited the number of new things that the team had to learn all at once. And I still feel like the project would have been a success and likely would have been completed even sooner. The other thing that we saw is the library maintainers in the KMP space are constantly pushing out new changes. We would have certain bugs, sometimes like maybe in our resources library or something with the logging library. And before we knew it, the fix was already out. And then we were trying to struggle to find time to incorporate those fixes and then take our hacks or workarounds. This is something you want to keep in mind. At the time, we were working with beta. And so when you're developing against a beta library, just bake in time to handle these upgrades and expect to have them coming more often. Okay, so we're on to the last step already, which is testing. When you are working on a project, the goal is not to use KMP. The goal is to release something that users want. So how do you decide whether things are even working or not? How do you know that this project actually has the potential to be the game changer that the company needs? Well, you're going to have to take into consideration various inputs. So the first, I like to just say, is qualitative. You want to do user interviews. How does it actually feel just to use this new product with the shared code on all platforms where it's available? Next, look at some quantitative results. Actually, what is the data telling you? Perhaps that'll be by means of your analytics tracking solution. And then finally, trust your gut. Hopefully, you have someone on the team that has past experience with launching MVP or at least bringing new technologies into an organization. And so, what does that mean? First, dog food your own product. Make sure other people at your company know what you're working on and can have access to it. For our application, we had a dedicated channel in Slack. Anyone in the company could join and provide their email address so that they could have access to the test flight builds or be added to our internal test track on Google Play. This allowed us to have a constant stream of qualitative feedback from people at our actual company. And besides this, you want to talk to your target customers often. This is critical. If you don't talk to your customers, then you're going to risk not reaching your ultimate goals with the project. I recommend having a beta group of customers that can work with your team to give you updates, let you know how the product is working with them. We often found that internally it will work really great for us. We give it to our beta testers, and then these bugs would just pop up out of nowhere. This is totally normal, it's to be expected, but you just need to want to keep that in mind. Now, when it comes to your quantitative data, decide as a team what metrics matter. There's tons of metrics that you can collect, but which ones actually matter? You want to see things change over time as you're getting closer to your MVP launch. For us, we settled on like the number of events being created in our events app, and this will help us to determine if this new product was a fit. Integrating with Firebase Analytics made this super easy for us. And the final input is you. You have to trust your gut. If you have someone on your team who's gone through this process before, then they have valuable insights that they can provide, maybe how you should approach the launch, the testing, and more. Don't try to discount their experience. You hire smart people for a reason, so go ahead and let them shine. Now, the number one thing that we learned during this part is that perfect is the enemy of good, right? Don't let that happen to you. So many times we were obsessing over little small things in our MVP, and we could have just moved forward, and it was really holding us back. Finally, have the proper viewpoint. Adopting a new technology is a journey. There's a lot of bumps in the road, so just take things slowly and enjoy the sights along the way. And that's it. We've gone from buy-in all the way to testing your product with real users. I hope that this talk has you excited about experimenting with KMP in production. Thank you. And I believe I have time for questions. Yes, I do. And there's Mike People available.
Hi,
Okay, yes. Bye.
thank you for your great presentation. I got a question about the scale of the project, how big the project it is, how much user do you have, how many users do you have, and how many screens in your application you have. So it matters for me the scale of the project as someone who decide to move to KMP or not. And the second question is about the monorepo. We are using monorepo. I want to know how successful that experience it is.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all of your questions. All right, so let's start with the first one. Scale of the project is about 40,000 users. Number of screens, I guess probably 30-ish different screens. The success of the monorepo, it was incredible. It was brilliant that they made that decision. In fact, when I'm looking at other projects, I'm often asking myself, why is this not a monorepo? So I think that that was a great move for the team. And we were also very nervous. Both of the apps were about 10 years old, like the original apps. So we were nervous about bringing all of that into one monorepo. And almost like overnight, pretty much, it was just done. So it's not as daunting as it sounds to combine the code into a monorepo. Okay, any other questions? There's one right here. Oh, and over here. Okay.
Yeah, I want great talk though, by the way. I wanted to ask about also monorepo. So I heard you have like 10 engineers. So I don't know, it might work because what if you have like more than 40 engineers? Do you think monorepo is way to go? Because I think it would be like we only have 40 engineers in Android, and if you combine the shared repository and everything,
Yeah.
I think it would be quite bigger, and the PR rate and stuff would be much higher.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And, it depends. What I'll say is if you've been able to divide your team in such a way where they're really focused on particular features, then you're less likely to run into a lot of merge conflicts. Also, you can use the GitHub code owners file to specify that like only this particular group of people need to be notified when these certain directories are modified so that it's not like everyone's getting spammed by every single PR that hits the repo. I do think there's ways that you could still make a mono repo work, but it's something where like you'd have to weigh the pros and cons for your particular company.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Hi.
Oh, yes, hey.
That was lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
I love a story. So, how does this extend beyond your team then? So, your team, as you said, they had a really steep learning curve.
Yep.
It sounds like they did some pretty awesome things.
Yes.
How do you share that knowledge so the next team doesn't have the same kind of massive on ramp?
What's really great about working in the Kotlin community is how accessible the actual library maintainers are. I'm a big fan of giving feedback, maybe too much feedback. You can ask the Android team. But when we come up with issues, I'm always like, wait, did you give feedback to the people? And they're like, oh no, I didn't even create a GitHub issue, let them know what's happening. And we try to give feedback. If that was about 3 years ago or so, maybe more, that we started working with KMP. And now some of the exact things that we were complaining about have a solution. Like we wouldn't have had to switch to SQL Delight now because of Room's multi-platform. And there's many, many more things that I've seen over the years that have just made the experience so much better. Fleet was nowhere to be found. There was no Amper. I mean, the list kind of goes on and on and on about the improvements that I've seen in the multi-platform space, where for the next group of people that want to adopt it, there's just like zillions of examples from TouchLab and John O'Reilly, who makes like a new KMP repo every day. So it's just so many more resources than back then. And I believe it's in part due to the community giving feedback every step of the way.
Fantastic. So you're kind of leaving a paved path behind you almost, as the next people go, oh, look, we can go that way.
I mean, I hope so.
Thanks.
Okay, next question. Oh, okay, yes.
Hi. Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a great presentation. If I understood correctly from the diagram, your view model layer is not shared. You have still like native Android view models and same for iOS. And I was just curious if you ever considered having that shared, if you had that discussion within the team, basically how you ended up making the decision on up until at what point Kotlin Multiplatform goes in our code base.
Yeah, so initially we did talk about it, and I felt like we could share the view models. There was mostly just concern from the iOS team because of how they like to do their view models, and they said they had certain like objects that adhere to different protocols, and then their little sorcery thing, I forgot what it was called, that they were using for their testing. So they didn't want to have shared view models. However, once we went to the mono repo, and basically everyone was writing code everywhere, the view models were so identical. It just made no sense that they were separate. And we were using Coin for our dependency injection, and it was even more like, okay, why are we doing this? And the team was like really considering maybe we could try just like sharing the view models as well.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep. Yes.
Hi, thank you for the talk. One question is, how would you do the same if your next project is a much bigger one, like 100 developers, 100 modules? What will be your steps on that?
Oh, that's a great question. Okay, so what would I do if it was huge? First, I'd have to have the whole team agree on a very strict architecture. And so it's like, I would love for us to share all the way up to the view models and even consider maybe compose multi-platform. And this would be based on the skill set of the people on the team. I do still think that a mono repo could work. And I would advocate for having very strict separators between the certain features that the different groups of engineers focused on. So like, this is the payments people, this is the home screen people, this is the settings people, etc. And I do think it could still be a success.
Okay, thank you. And if the project is already there, so there are like a lot of iOS developers, everyone has their own scope, how would you do the migration to this new KMP?
I would do it for something new. I wouldn't try to like convert existing things. So if someone's like, oh, guess what? Now we are gonna do plant care, I don't know, whatever, with AI. Okay, great. Then I would create a new separate module that would use KMP. It can work right alongside your existing code base. You don't have to change anything. Once we moved to the mono repo, that's essentially what we were doing anyway, because we wanted to start using that shared code in the legacy applications. So you can do that as well. There's no need to say like, oh, I have to start a whole new repo in order to use KMP, or it has to be completely isolated in order to use it. And also, I'm really happy to just talk more about it while I'm still here at this conference if you want to find me after my talk.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
So thank you very much for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have two questions. So the first one, saying that you've been like in business like for 10 years with native applications, both on Android and iOS.
Yep.
And then you've migrated. Have you seen any measurable performance changes? That's the first question. And the second is, it's not really about KMP, but like I've seen that you mentioned moving or migrating from Moshi to Kotlin serialization, and we're kind of where I work right now. We're in between making this decision, and we've been like fighting about it a lot. We've been like doing benchmarking, and like lots of things have come up. So if you have any insights on how you made that decision and why, I'd love to know it. If not, then fine.
Yeah, so have I seen benefits? Yes, and I'll give you a concrete example, which is very fascinating to me. The iOS app got faster. And we're like, whoa, why is the iOS app faster? I was like, a little baffling here. Now, we were using GraphQL. I'll try to like tell the story really quickly. Okay, so we were using GraphQL. GraphQL, it actually matters the shape of the queries and mutations that you write. If you don't include an identifier in certain queries, then it's not going to be cached. Since we were writing GraphQL queries all over the place, then some iOS people, maybe they would write it with no ID and nothing was ever being cached. And then the Android person, maybe they wrote it with an ID, or this other person was doing XYZ. So once we were able to consolidate everything into the shared code, just almost with no thought, the iOS app was faster because things were able to be cached, fewer requests to the network, so it was actually a net cost savings for us because we weren't hitting our API as often. And it was incredible. Like, it's something that we weren't really even thinking about. It wasn't a goal of the project, but it helps you to see that when you're writing the same thing here, 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 and here, that it's so easy to introduce these like subtle mistakes that can cost your business lots of money and also degrade the user performance. There's no reason that the iOS app is making 5 network requests when I go from this screen to this screen, and the Android app wasn't. It's the same exact thing. So that's like almost immediate benefits that we saw from moving to shared code. The Kotlin X serialization versus Moshi thing, I don't know. I know some of the maintainers, so I don't want to like bash anyone. But what I'll say is, do your performance analysis, and then also think about where you want to see your project long term. Like, if your team is actually ready to go all in on like KMP or like embracing Kotlin more and more, then why not go with serialization? It does the job. It's very sleek API. I haven't had any issues from making that migration. Okay.
Hi. Here.
Yes. Yeah.
I also have 2 questions. The first one is, you mentioned Coin. I know that dependency injection is not that familiar to iOS folks. So first question is, how was that, like conversations around that? And second question is, have you seen, on your experience, like Android folks getting context on the iOS platform and on the other way around, beyond just the common terminology, like their interest in the other platform?
Yes, yes, and yes. So the first question about Coin. Yes, the iOS people were not familiar. And initially what was happening is the Android team was properly wiring up the Coin module with all the appropriate dependencies. And then the iOS team was just like manually creating the dependencies inside of the constructors. Then we had like a moment for everyone on the team, and we had like an offsite, and we spent a whole session of it just talking about Coin and dependency injection. And then we paired on making sure that we got the iOS modules up to sync. And afterwards, then it was like, oh, yeah, I love it. This is so obvious. This is how we should have been doing it all along. And so that went really well. And then your second question was?
Yeah, like Android folks interested in iOS platform and the other way around, like beyond just common communication.
Yeah, the Android people are very excited to learn iOS because they want to make more money one day. It's just really simple. Like, I mean, they were like so excited, like, oh, wow, this is how I do this thing in Swift UI. And they were like so eager to try to contribute to the iOS code base.
And the other way around, like iOS folks interested also in the Android platform?
What I'll say is they liked having autonomy and they liked not being blocked. And so being able to contribute to the code base made them happy. And they did just enough Android UI work so that they could change some shared code and not break anything. And they felt like really good with that. So that's what I'll say about the iOS team. Okay, now I don't know how much time I have left. You're welcome. But the next person, you only get 1 question. Okay.
Hi, I think you maybe partly answered that,
Yeah.
that question I have maybe there, but around sort of code ownership, I think earlier on you referred to having like KMP developers building an SDK, so did you have dedicated folks who worked on the shared code, who provided an API, or were UI developers involved in sharing in?
We had 2 primary KMP contributors. They were like the strongest. So if there was something like weird happening or people, they tried to debug on their own and they couldn't figure it out, we had 2 people who were like, that was their specialty. But they still contributed to the UI as well, just like any other engineer. Yep. Okay.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. I enjoyed a lot. I have this question to you. Since you have a very successful story with KMP, have you considered moving to the Compose Multiplatform maybe? And maybe this way you can get rid of the iOS developers?
Okay, that's a deep question. What I'll say is yes, I really would love to experiment with Compose Multiplatform. And would I get rid of iOS developers is very provocative because I would also get rid of Android developers. And I think people should just be developers. Yeah. And I see the way that the industry is going is to have people that are more generalists and that can do these different things. Like how many of you work day to day with the DBA? When I started, there was the DBA, and you had to like talk to them, ask them questions, and it was like awkward, and you're like, I don't know about constraints and stuff. Okay, but I haven't talked to a DBA in like a decade because that's no longer like a big thing for the industry. And so as far as where I'm seeing development going in general, I think people just need to be very strong developers. So that's my answer to your provocative question.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hey. Thank you very much for the great presentation. The question is, did you lost any iOS developer from the team, or did you had difficulties to the interviews to hire a new iOS developer?
That is such a good question. We actually did lose one iOS developer, and he was one of our strongest developers because he also knew Kotlin before he even joined the company. And I was nervous about the impact that it could have on like the potential adoption of the rest of the project. But everyone just kind of stepped up and filled the gap. And it's easier to work when people believe that a project can be successful versus trying to partner with one person who's somewhat of a naysayer, but they're still working on the project anyway. So in the end, I feel like it was a positive, the fact that he left for this particular project. And then as far as like hiring people want to work on new things. Like they want to be able to say, oh, I worked here and I learned something new, now go somewhere else and make 20K more. Like that's what developers want to be able to do, constantly growing their skills. The other thing that I actually forgot to mention about the benefits is that the same way with the little, AI example, when you go to market or you're looking for investments, to be able to say, like, we're using the cutting edge technology. And you're just like, oh, wow, millions of dollars. So it's that kind of thing where there's other benefits just outside of people being able to build their skill set.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay.
Hello, thanks for the talk. I was wondering, do you have any statistics on maybe work speed or code savings?
Work speed or code savings? Nothing comes like top of mind. I think it's more so that working with the same group of people and seeing what they were able to deliver before KMP, and then looking at the features and the impact that the said features had on the business afterwards, it was noticeable. I remember when I first joined, it was bizarre. People were like, so can you explain to us why the mobile team doesn't want to work? Like, what? How do you have a whole team of people who don't want to work? But for them, from their perspective, it seemed like everything was just so slow. And being able to move to this technology actually helped it to seem like, oh, wow, things are just like really, really burning over here in this particular team.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll ask one last question.
Okay.
Do you have any advice? Because all the points you made are great for like staff managers, like staff engineers or managers. But do you have any advice for like mid engineers that want to, have constructive proposals or how to share these kind of ideas?
Yeah, do it. I say that jokingly, but yeah, just do it. I remember back in the day, you know, like back in the day when Android phones first came out, and I got one. I was so excited, and my company only made iOS apps, and I was like, oh, this is a travesty. There should also be an Android app available. And so, like, you know, on the side, I would like work on an Android version. It looked terrible. It was horrible. It was hideous, but it worked. It talked to our API, loaded some things up, and I was like, hey, look, you know, this looks horrible, but it works. That's how I became an Android developer. Like, seriously, just do it. Just try it. Pick one thing and develop it in KMP. It's not going to hurt anyone. And if anything, it might turn you the opposite direction. You might say, oh, this was horrible. I never want to do this again. But at least you took a chance.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Okay, thank you all so much. Thank you.